Hello everyone and welcome to another Scots Whay Hae podcast, and tonight I'd like to say welcome to Stuart and Karn David. Thank you for coming along.
Hi, it's good to be here.
We're going to talk about a few things now. I don't know whether you realise this, but we're going to talk about your book, Stuart, in the All Night Cafe, which has just come out, about the early days of Belle and Sebastian, which you were a founder member, I should say. But we're also going to talk about Looper. I've got a box set out with some new material on it, is that right?
There is, we put a new album out at the same time, and most of the new albums are on the box set.
Okay.
How many songs is it?
Seven tracks from the new album.
Oh, excellent. Okay, well, we'll talk about the box set later before I get sidetracked. Believe it or not, there is some kind of structure to these things. So, starting off with In the All Night Cafe, it opens with an afternoon in 1994 and then moves on from there. So just explain about what the kind of beginnings of you wanting to be a musician. Yeah,
it covers quite a short period, and it says in the subtitle it's a year, but I think it's really 18 months. Mm-hmm. But it starts at a point where I'd already been a musician for maybe 10 years. That's all I'd been doing for 10 years. But during those 10 years, there wasn't really anything of any note that happened, so I just started at the point where something was starting to happen.
Because you joined, there was a kind of course going on, wasn't it? A music course that in Glasgow that you came to kind of be involved in?
Yeah, there was a course for unemployed musicians called Beatbox in Finnieston. And it was just one of those courses when you've been signing on for, I think it was at the time it was probably a few years, but now it's about 13 weeks before you have to go on a course. So it was really just one of those courses to bring the numbers down.
Yeah.
For how many people were unemployed, and it wasn't really. There was nothing really to learn there. It was really just a holding tank.
From the descriptions in the book, you meet quite a lot of disparate characters who are into very different music and other things as well. So, from that beginning, how did you make the connections that would eventually become Belle and Sebastian?
Well, I think when I joined the course at first, you were only on 2 days a week, maybe 3 days a week, and there was a guy called Alistair who was doing the same days as me, but I think he must have been coming in for the whole week or something, because he also knew Stuart Murdoch, who was doing the different 3 days from me, and he invited us both round to his house one day to practice with him, but we both just thought it was only us.
So you thought it was just
going to be a sort of one-on-one thing with him, and when we turned up, we found each other there.
And what some people might not know, I suppose many people will, was that the original name of the band was Lisa Helps the Blind?
Yeah.
And was that just the three of you to begin with?
Yeah, that was just the three of us for, it seems like a long time, but I can't really remember exactly how long it was, but it was, to begin with, it was a sort of 3 songwriters band, and we would each sing lead vocals on the songs we had written. But me and Alistair also both had our own bands for doing our own material, but Stuart Murdoch didn't, so it quickly became just a band to play Stuart's songs, but with Alistair in charge. It was really, Alistair was the driving force behind it, really. Okay,
and at the time, what was there a kind of supportive Glasgow music scene? Or did you not feel really part of anything like that?
It was kind of unclear how much was going on in Glasgow or how many musicians there were until you got into beatbox and came across maybe, it must have been a couple of hundred musicians that you'd never really come across before who all had bands. but who were all struggling to get gigs because it was quite an exclusive Glasgow music scene at the time. There was only really two ways you could go. One was white funk, and the other was the kind of Oasis, proto-Oasis thing that was just happening at that time.
Yeah.
Wearing your anorak and playing
electric guitar.
Yeah.
So when you start to get other musicians around you, I said in my review, it seems a bit like the picking of the Magnificent Seven. Yeah. Did you have these musicians that went, they'll fit, or that person will fit? I mean, or was there a kind of idea about how you wanted the band to, what you wanted the band to become, or was it just, it became that way organically?
Well, after Alistair decided we weren't getting anywhere quickly enough and he needed to get famous, so he left. And that really just left me and Stuart adrift, kind of, because Alistair had been driving the thing. And I had my own band, and Stuart wanted to have his own band, but had never been able to find MD to be in it.
Right.
And I think he himself had a kind of idea of who he would want to be in his band, but they didn't exist, I don't think.
I was going to say, so not specific people, but kind of ideals.
Kind of ideals, I think. But we would just play with anybody for a while in beatbox, and there was a kind of ever-changing lineup of loads of people who obviously didn't fit.
Yeah.
And then suddenly a band started to come together that was the band Stuart wanted, but not really the people he had imagined, I don't think. I think he still had an imaginary band in his head that he called Belle and Sebastian,
right, that
was quite separate from the bunch of people that he'd ended up with.
So at the time, or eventually, the Stowe College relationship starts up, which is eventually they put out Tiger Milk on your course, which was a music business course, is that right?
Yeah, it was run by Alan Rankin from the Associates.
Yeah.
And it was a music business course to give people experience of all the different jobs that were available in the music business, and to illustrate that he would just have them put out a record to see what all the roles that were involved in putting out a record, so as you could work out what kind of area of it you wanted to go into. But I don't think the record was an important part of it.
Yeah.
I think it was just a sort of side issue to give them something to do.
Like a project almost.
Yeah.
Okay. And whether it came out or not wasn't really perhaps as...
No, when it came out, that was the end of the course, so if anything came of it, wasn't really relevant.
It's funny thinking that Alan Rankin was doing this, because I always think of a man in makeup with chopsticks in his hair walking about at college. But so that was how the college kind of viewed it. How, at this point, did you see it as being, well, we can get this made on not other people's time, but we can get the backing to do it, and then we can give it a life after that?
Not really. I think the offer came along quite sort of accidentally, because Richard Coburn was on the music business course,
right,
and he was my flatmate, and I think he had put one of Stuart's tapes in for it because the course had heard a demo on the radio, but I don't think Stuart had actually heard of the course or put a tape in for it. So when he was offered to do the single, he'd already decided nothing was happening for him in Glasgow, and he was going to move to San Francisco.
Yeah.
So when the offer came up, it wasn't something that he was even particularly interested in at the time. He didn't really have any plan for it except to not do it.
Because it does seem that Richard Coburn is instrumental in kind of getting things moving.
Yeah.
And Neil, I suppose.
Yeah, Neil, who became Belle and Sebastian's manager, was also on that music course. Right. And I think it was him that had heard the demo on the radio. But I think because Richard was on the course, he had more of an idea of the potential of putting the record out with them, whereas to us it just seemed like it's just a college course and it doesn't really, it can't really benefit you anyway.
So how did Tiger Milk get picked up after that? Was it just almost word of mouth, or?
Well, initially it didn't. We all had boxes of it. There was only 1,000 copies.
Sounds familiar.
Minus what had been destroyed at the launch party when people used them as frisbees. And the rest of them were just underneath our beds. We all had like 200 copies each or something like that.
Various Christmas presents going out.
Yeah. So it really didn't take off, and even after it had come out, me and Stuart took some copies through to a record shop in Edinburgh, and they wouldn't take them because they said, we're not really interested in this. So nothing happened with it at all to begin with. But something happened within the industry where I think to do with Alan Rankin, the band had become a sort of a buzzword with London A&R people, but we didn't have an audience or anybody at that point who had responded to Tiger Milk.
Because I'm thinking if the Glasgow kind of music scene was as you described it, then you almost have to build your audience from scratch and your following from scratch.
Yeah.
And again, it's astonishing, as you say, it's written over a short period.
Yeah.
Things move incredibly quickly.
Yeah.
Were you aware of that at the time? Did you feel this is unusual in terms of a band that things are kind of moving this quickly?
It was at the point where it happened, when it started to, but most of the time, even for that year or year and a half, nothing happened. So nothing happened at all, and then everything happened. So it wasn't as if it built over a year or year and a half. It was just like a week or 2 weeks. We had gone from nobody knowing who the band was to people like Seymour Stein flying over from America to try and sign us and stuff. But we still hadn't played a gig or anything like that. And we still didn't have an audience of any kind. So it was really strange, particularly to me and maybe Stevie, who we'd both been doing it for maybe 10 or 12 years by that point, and knowing how easy it is for nothing to happen.
Yeah.
So it was just like a phenomenon, really.
I think you can get the idea of suddenly, Richard Coben appears and now Stevie Jackson's appearing and this band is being built. You said that Stuart had an idea not just of what he wanted the band, but what he didn't want the band to be. Yeah. I think maybe that applies to yourself as well. Did you have a clear idea of a kind of image that wasn't going to be certain things, for instance, kind of rock cliche and all the things that a lot of rock music was promoting at the time?
Yeah, just everything we had experienced in beatbox and doing gigs with sound men who tried to give you a certain rock sound, and just the whole kind of rock and roll thing of sex, drugs and rock and roll, and the machismo of rock and all that kind of thing. It was, it was the intention to avoid all of that and really just all of the standard way of doing things, the venues that there were in Glasgow, and I think a lot of it was from the beatbox experience. It was very clear that you didn't want to become like the people who were running the course in beatbox, and that was something to be avoided.
And so almost as much as the music, I think, I might be wrong, that stance itself seemed to find an audience. That there was people out there willing, that wanted, it was about the music, and they didn't particularly care about the haircuts and all of these things. And they were kind of waiting for something different. They just maybe didn't realise it at the time.
Yeah, I think so. And I think there was just the fortuitous thing of the internet just kind of taking off at that point, so all these people could suddenly find out that each other existed, and the band became a bit of a focal point for all these people finding each other online on the Sinister mailing list. And it was, I think the internet was quite instrumental in,
that's interesting,
and us being able to do something that you just couldn't do because there was quite a standard way of doing things then that had been developed since the 1960s and had become quite crystallised by then.
Yeah, that is interesting, because I suppose perhaps the people who were discovering how the internet was used best at that time might be the very people that would like the music you were making. You know, because it was, not everyone had access to internet, or even cared about it, because didn't think it was such a big deal. So as the real kind of success really begins after this book ends, was that what you said?
Yeah.
So why did you decide to chop it up?
I think really because once things started happening, everybody knows what happened.
Yeah.
That story's out there.
I think that's probably fair enough. Yeah.
Even if everybody doesn't know it, everyone can find it out if they want to. But it was really just, I felt this part was quite undocumented, even for most of the people who are in Belle and Sebastian.
Yeah.
Because it's only at the end that particularly Chris and Belle come in, but it's even quite late on before Stevie comes in, and Sarah isn't in it at all.
Yeah.
So it's a whole part of the band that some people in the band didn't experience.
And was this kind of early period ever really discussed? I mean, you say, well, you know, we started out, you know, did beatbox, or was it just you just got on with the music?
No, I think that Stevie was keen to read the book to find out what had happened, because we hadn't really talked about it, and particularly because the band didn't do interviews when we came out at first. That's the stuff that you would have talked about in interviews. How did you get together and how did you meet? So it was entirely untold, really. And
there was, I think, partly self-made mythology about the band as well, particularly in those early years.
Yeah, there was just the thing of the two Belle and Sebastians, the one that was Stuart's imaginary Belle and Sebastian, and the one that was the actual physical band out in the world. So
sounds like you might look over it and be quite disappointed by the real thing.
Yeah. It's entirely possible.
Well, since Karn's with us, and an important part of the book is actually the correspondence you have with her all through this time.
Yeah.
I kind of think about it, it's almost like letters from the front line being sent home. This is happening. So, I mean, how's that for you, Karn, when you were receiving this kind of correspondence about this time in particular?
Yeah, at the time, it was really interesting for me to get all this information about stuff he was doing, and it's interesting that he used a lot of the letters to get information to write the book. Mm-hmm. So, going through them again, you can't forget it so long ago as well.
Sure.
But yeah, it's funny thinking of it now. At the time it's like, oh yeah, this guy knows in a band and they're doing these things. You don't pay a huge amount of attention.
Yeah.
But the stories about beatbox and stuff, it was all just really clear. I mean, he's a really great writer, so the letters are it's all really clear. So in a way, they kind of seemed like stories to me.
Yeah,
Until we were kind of meeting up more, and you know, and then I met the band and saw them and stuff, so it started becoming like, oh, this is real. It's not
It is strange to go back to letters that you've written in the past. I did that recently, and one, it doesn't seem sometimes that you've written them.
Yeah.
It seems like someone else was involved in all these things. Is that how writing the book was?
Yeah, not so much. The memories were really clear and I was a bit stuck in that period, but going back to the letters and finding it was a completely different voice that I used then and stuff, and that I was just kind of really enthusiastic in a way that I'm not now, or was a surprise. But I think it was a real help because for me Karen was quite central to my part in the Belle and Sebastian story, because it was Karen that had introduced me to indie music in general, like the Pastels. I was just completely unaware of that music, and I started writing to Karen when I was 19, I think, so that would be about 1989, and she introduced me to that music then. So without that, what Stuart was doing wouldn't have made any sense to me, and I don't think I'd have got involved in it.
Right.
And a lot, to most people in beatbox, what he was doing it didn't make any sense to them. They didn't know what he was doing. So Karen had given me that background that just made me able to understand it as soon as I first met Stuart. Even before he played music, I thought, just from the way he was dressed and stuff, he's one of those guys that are in those bands that Karen likes.
Because that seems to me almost the rock family tree, if you like, that Belle and Sebastian follow in terms of Scottish music anyway, is Pastels and BMX Bandits and that kind of thing. And I guess a lot of people who were making music weren't listening to that. You know, it's still quite a small, you know, as you see nowadays with people can find, and if you put any band in, it'll come up influences and it'll take you through them. But it wasn't like that. It was kind of word of mouth.
No,
I
even
do
in
wonder.
Glasgow,
I wonder how I knew about the Pastels. You know, thinking back on it, how did I know that? I mean, I grew up on a farm in the middle of nowhere, but I went to school in Kilmarnock, so I really was. It seemed like the middle of nowhere, and it was my friend Mandy and I were just quite obsessed really with the Pastels, BMX Bandits. But now I do think, how did we know?
Probably somebody's big brother or sister that had
fancies, I suppose. I remember seeing, but yeah, I don't know.
Liam, was it Liam? No.
Yeah, so it's funny. Now it's really easy to not just find the information but hear it straight away.
Yeah, exactly. And go back and hear the old stuff as well.
But even just stuff that you did know about, like so I remember trekking all over Glasgow trying to find an associated album. Just you couldn't get it in Kilmarnock, you know.
Yeah.
Just that difference alone. You just get everything instantly.
Growing up in Glasgow, I don't think we ever realised how spoilt we were for access to record shops and bands playing on the street, you know, quite well known bands playing on the street. But then I had friends who lived in a small place called Annan in Dumfriesshire, and they had nothing like that, you know. It was the local John Menzies and whatever that.
I think Boots, I remember buying records in Boots.
And the library, it was really... Where I grew up, there weren't any record shops.
Yeah.
So it was just whatever they had in the library, which was Dweezil Zappa. Is that his name?
Wow, it is Frank Zappa's son.
that was the one that was always sitting at the front of the rack, and I never took it out. It was called Having a Bad Day, I think. But he had really good skin and really good hair, and at the time I was a teenager with acne and bad hair, and I thought, how can he be having a bad day?
And his dad's Frank Zappa, for goodness sake. That sounds like The Librarian. That was his favourite record and he was putting it there. I kind of like that. I wonder if it's, you know, you had to kind of work to find the music that was yours back then. It would be, you know, it wasn't kind of.
And I suppose by the time we were writing, you know, mixtapes, that's how it spread. So that's why you got bombarded with Pastels and BMX Bandits.
Yeah, because even in Glasgow, I would be in bands, although I was still living in Alexandria. I was in bands with people who lived in Glasgow, and even musicians who lived in Glasgow. They'd never heard of the Pastels, never mind having heard them or heard the music. So it was it was quite a hidden thing.
Yeah. As you say, I think still the predominant sound was the kind of white soul boy sound,
Yeah.
or kind of rock, more rock sounds.
Yeah.
Well, it's the perfect time to go on to Looper, I think. How did Looper come about? Because you started Looper when you were still in Belle and Sebastian, is that right?
Yeah. I think initially it started with me doing this spoken word song with Belle and Sebastian, A Century of Elvis,
Mm-hmm.
and I wanted to explore that a bit more. But I think we actually formed the band for, my sister was doing a fundraiser during her degree at the art school, and I think by then I had made a spoken word single for Sub Pop, and that was Looper. That was just me on the computer, and she asked us to do a show of that kind of thing at her fundraiser.
Okay.
She asked you to do a show, and then you
Right.
continually pestered me to join you on stage, which I was horrified at the thought of. And I was like, no, that's not what I do. But because Impossible Things, I think you must have done that already for some
Yeah.
had you? So there's a typewriter, and I thought, well, I can play the.
Play
That's what
the
you're trying to get me to
typewriter.
do. Come on stage and play the typewriter. And although I thought that was quite a cool thing to do, I was just, I'm far too nervous to do that. I can't do that. But so I thought, well, I'll make Kay lots of films, and he didn't want to just be sitting getting stared at.
Mm-hmm.
I'll make you films and put some wee spinning sculptures and distract people with Super 8 loops and things. So that was the compromise, because I didn't want to be on stage pretending I could play an instrument, which I've now learned how to pretend. But yeah, so the first show was at the art school.
Yeah.
And was it just that? It was kind of almost a multimedia thing with the music?
Yeah, I had a box that Cam had built, and I sat on the floor with it, with all my... Well, I think I pretended it was samplers. I think it was really a CD player.
Because first time I heard Looper, there was samples and there was electronica, but it always sounded like there was valves involved, and maybe not a laptop. It did sound like it was almost nostalgic for something that was quite new.
Yeah.
Was that a deliberate thing?
It was, yeah. It was. It just seemed to be at the exact moment where you could start making stuff on a PC at home, and I think about 1997, actually using audio rather than MIDI.
Right.
And I'd done a MIDI course back at the end of the 80s, just a year-long college course. So I'd learned sequencing and all that, but I didn't like MIDI sounds. And it was only really when I realised you could use kind of old sounding sounds that were kind of sounds that I had learned in Belle and Sebastian, like lots of pianos and mellotrons and things that I'd only really learned through Chris and Belle and Sebastian. Just learning that you could now make short loops with them on the computer, but use it in the way that I'd learned in college to do sequencing. But it was that you could make that old kind of sound with it that attracted me to it.
And so how did it go from those early days to becoming a signed band, and when did you decide that Looper was your future rather than continuing with Belle and Sebastian?
It progressed. It evolved quite slowly to start with, didn't it?
Although you your contract with...
Yeah,
an
even
unusual
when we
contract.
signed to Jeepster with Belle and Sebastian, I had still intended to be doing my own music, so
Right.
I'd got a special contract that only me and Beck had that allowed you to do your own music with a different label from the one you were signed to.
Right.
So I'd always had that intention, and we made the Sub Pop. I'd made the Sub Pop single, the first Looper one, before we even did a show. So I already had a recording contract with Sub Pop for it, but I didn't have any songs or a band. so it evolved into. I think we did a few more shows like that art school show, didn't we?
Yeah,
And
we did.
gradually my brother joined doing slides,
Yeah.
Stuart and Karn, and then he started playing guitar a bit, hiding backstage to play guitar. And again, it just happened really quickly, and within, it seemed like a few months or not very long period, Scott, who I'd been in bands with before I was in Belle and Sebastian, had joined, and we were on tour in America with the Flaming Lips, but I'm not really sure how it got from there to there.
It's happened quite quickly, didn't it?
Yeah.
That seems quite an odd line-up, being the Flaming Lips. Was that when they were like pretending that their heads were bleeding? And
Yeah,
It was a soft-bulletin.
Soft-bulletin, yeah. Fantastic.
They were still pretty small in the States, but brilliant fun, really.
I bet, I can imagine.
It was a good match at the time because they didn't have a drummer either. They were using Stephen's drums on video behind them, and we were both using videos. So, but it was three months we toured for them with. It was,
yeah, they were great.
everybody was destroyed by the end of it.
And was this, I mean, when Up a Tree came out, was that roughly about that time?
Yeah, it was soon after. We did our own headline tour in America first when Up a Tree came out, and that was a month-long tour. And it was quite soon after that we came back and did the Bowley, where the Flaming Lips were playing, and almost went straight back to America with them after that. And the Geometrid wasn't out yet when we did the Flaming Lips tour. I don't think, was it? Just we got the vinyls on the last day of the tour or something. And you talk about the album The Geometrid, which has got Mondo 787 on it, which of course was picked up by Cameron Crowe for Vanilla Sky. How did that come about? I don't really know. We did hear that
Sub Pop told us that whether they had sent the album to somebody, we got told it got played on set while they were filming, and they just got really used to hearing it with what they were looking at. So that's the story we were told.
They just put it in the film as a. I think they did say they'd been playing it every day on the set to make them happy. And then when they were editing, they just put the songs in as place markers of where they wanted songs, and then at the end they replaced them, but two of them I think probably just accidentally.
So you were almost the soundtrack to the whole film.
The soundtrack to the whole thing to begin with.
Well, he does mention Rupert in it, doesn't he?
Yeah.
It's the second time we've mentioned Cameron Crowe in this podcast. There's a band called Skinny Dipper who are on Olive Grove Records, who originally were called Almost Famous. Apparently he found out and followed them on Twitter and saying, I really like your stuff. So he obviously does love his music, I think that's. So the box set's out. So to explain a little bit about, is it 5 CD set? Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of songs, 58 songs I think altogether, which is almost everything. There's a few strays that didn't quite make it, and really because it was just starting to get, well, that's probably enough. It took quite a while to, because we signed the catalogue to me, and we just thought that they would release the original albums as theirs, and Daniel thought it should be a box set, and then us decided, well, you can't just do a normal box set, you've got to mess about with it somehow. So yeah, we kind of reordered everything and kind of tried to make something new out of the old stuff, which I think works, but that's up for people to
There's a new version of Mondo 77 on it, isn't there? Or is it just a new video to go with it? I just noticed
it.
Video.
Yeah, there's a new video. There was a new 8-bit version of it as well, but I'm not sure if it ended up in or not.
No, but we've kind of grouped everything by type rather than doing it by album. So all the spoken word songs are together, and all the kind of electronic ones on one disc. So.
And Skinny Legs, is that new single?
Yeah, it's been treated a bit as a single.
Yeah.
It was on the radio at 5 o'clock this morning.
Right. Fantastic.
On Radio 6, I think.
Yeah.
So it's obviously a big hit.
As one of those weird coincidences, Ian Gardner, who did the video with you, I was at school.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the nicest men I know.
He is, he's lovely.
Yeah.
He was my tutor at college.
Was he really?
I went back and did an animation degree.
Fantastic.
And that's how I met him.
And it's a great video. I mean, it really is a fantastic video to go with it. You should have a look at that. So, what's next for Looper? Have you got any plans?
I think the main thing is we need to try and get back to having a live show.
Right.
We haven't really played live for over 10 years, I think. Scott left the band and Ronnie decided he was too old to do music anymore, but he's 7 years younger than me.
I think you're dropping a hint.
Yeah.
Subtle way of your brother trying to tell you something.
Yeah. So at the moment we're toying with the idea of doing a sort of synth pop duo, but the wrong way around, with Karn on synths and me on singing, so it'll be sort of
reverse Yazoo
the wrong way around.
You'll be the Alison Moon.
Yeah.
I can be Vince.
And I'd like to talk a bit about you, because you're a writer as well, a novelist as well. And I, a few years ago now, reviewed the novel Nalda Said, and I didn't really know anything about it. I picked it up and saw your name on it, and I went, well, have a read of that. It's a terrific book. I mean, really fantastic. What was the... I mean, tell us a little bit about your career as a writer, because it's not the only book you've written.
No, I think I started writing novels when I was about 20, I think, and I wrote 2 novels that didn't get published, and then when I was about then I wrote a short story that did get published in a collection along with Ali Smith and people like that. So I thought that was me getting somewhere, and so I wrote Nalda Said, and that didn't get anywhere, and then I stopped.
Really?
I think it was probably 5 years after I wrote Nalda Said it got published, and I suspect it got published because I was in Belle and Sebastian, and that was a selling point. And I don't think it would have got published otherwise. But I got a deal for 2 books, so I wrote another one quite quickly after that about a character called Peacock trying to make a dance version of Glenn Campbell's Rhinestone Cowboy. And that was going to be a film, and Graham Linehan that did Father Ted wrote the screenplay for it and stuff, but then somebody made a dance version of Glenn Campbell's Rhinestone Cowboy.
Of course they did.
And it was a hit, so it kind of spoiled it as a premise. And then I think I did... The Peacock Johnson character ended up in an Ian Rankin novel as the main villain after that. And
did he pick that as the name? Or?
Yeah, it was kind of a charity auction.
Oh, right,
where you could auction to get yourself in one of his books. So I did it as Peacock Johnson, and
you did pretend to be Peacock Johnson.
Yeah, we did a book tour where we were in character as Peacock Johnson and Bev, and a guy called Evil Bob, who had really been their driver on the American tour with the Flaming Lips.
Right.
So we did a whole kind of performance art thing with that, and it culminated in a show at the Royal Festival Hall in London, which was really us killing off Looper at that time. It was called a murder mystery DJ set where Peacock Johnson had killed me, and then that we kind of retired for a while after that. And I stopped. I wrote a reply to Ian Rankin's book, and then I stopped writing again for a while. Karen went back to college, and while she was there, I just studied literature on my own for quite a few years, and I've got back into it again now.
So you're working on something at the moment?
Yeah, I've got a series for young adults coming out, the first one coming out in October.
Oh, brilliant.
And I've started working on my Peacock character again. My agent's going to be trying to get something going with that soon as well. So.
I just love Ian Rankin saying that the name of his villain's going to be Peacock. You're going, oh, are you sure we've done this? We signed the contract with it. Well, I think you're right. I mean, it's in the All Night Cafe book as well. You write really well. engaging. And what's interesting about In the All Night Cafe, I think, is that you almost take a step back from it and kind of look on everything else that's going round.
Yeah.
Was that how you felt in the band at the time, or was it just looking back and you know, you'd maybe don't look at what you're doing, but you can see what other people are doing?
Yeah, I didn't feel like that in the band. I think when I think back on it now, I feel I imposed myself too much at the time. But I think it's much more of it's an accident of the fact that I kind of modelled it on The Great Gatsby or Breakfast at Tiffany's, where Stuart's Holly Golightly and I'm...
Do you know what? I didn't pick that up and I really wish I had. I might go back and rewrite the review now. Excellent.
Yeah, so that just really has always appealed to me, that way of telling a story where the narrator's not the focus of the book. And I think it was a way of trying to make up for the fact that I felt I had meddled too much in the band at the time.
You'd obviously done something right, because it was all... well, we'd like to kind of finish up just by chatting about kind of influences and things like that. So we spoke a little bit about Pastels and BMX Bandits, but what were your other influences on either Belle and Sebastian or Looper, or just in general?
I think for me, my main influences were always probably Bob Dylan, Leonard Cohen and Tom Waits, really.
Yeah. So really literary writers in a sense.
Yeah, I think people that probably would have been writers in a different era, particularly Leonard Cohen, has spoken about how when Bob Dylan came along, he realised that way of doing things on the page was over. So I didn't realise until I was older, really, that it was more literature rather than pop music that I was interested in, because I think these people would have been writers in a different era rather than songwriters.
Storytellers. Yeah. And I mean, you obviously bring a lot of the visual side of things, and you've done animation, as you say. So what were your kind of influences in you doing that side of things?
Actually, a huge influence from my dad's home movies.
Yeah. Well, I can see that in your work. Yeah, totally.
So I think, and just kind of recently realising that that's kind of always running through it a wee bit, and because Instagram and Instagram filters are a thing now, it just, you kind of realise, oh yeah, that's what I was trying to do a lot, and I was actually using quite a lot of my dad's old films in our Looper shows, and Stuart got me a Super 8 camera at one point, and I used to use my dad's old camera and film. I did just film stuff all the time, so I think I kind of was hiding behind the camera quite a lot of the time, because I was a wee bit shy, so it's quite a comfortable place to be, just spying on everyone else. But I think my dad, I mean, I'm from quite a big family and the youngest, so it was one of my jobs. He would get the projector out and the Super 8 films, and he showed me how to load, so that was my job, was to, I was finally, I had a role in the family. Being the youngest, and finally I'm in charge of something.
The projectionist.
Yeah, so I think that's just always held a bit of a fascination, and there was all these films of my family that I'm not really in, you know, because it was all before I was born. So I was just fascinated by it, and like, what's, you know, this whole life, this whole world that existed without me in it. So I think that probably influences a lot of films that I do. And
because of the film of that time, it does look like a completely different time. Yeah. You know, that's the...
It's funny, because now I made a video for the Paper Boat songs that kind of coincide with the release of the book, and it's amazing how that footage looks really ancient and really the kind of glow of nostalgia about it, just because it was on my dad's shonky old camera. But it was just from, well, it's quite a long time ago, but 96 or 97.
The footage, for those who haven't seen it, is footage of the band, isn't it, down, is it the Kelvin?
No, it was up
Bankery,
in...
actually.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Same day that I took the photo there on the cover.
On the cover.
But yeah, we had a wee day trip, and I think the intention was at the time that I would film stuff for a video for Paper Boat, because I did have a little paper boat, quite literally.
It just so happens.
Yeah. So, but it's funny how old that looks now. Just amazing. But it kind of works today. Yeah.
I think it works particularly with the launch of the book, because it does kind of typify that period, without a doubt. And anyone who's a fan of the band will immediately be taken back to that time. And what, in terms of writers, you said you've been studying literature. What kind of writers have been influencing you?
I think I've always had quite a solid core of people that I discovered when I was quite young, and primarily J.D. Salinger. When I was 15, we got that in school, and just this teacher who turned up really briefly, and it was like just a quick sort of sliver of light in the terrifying school. And then he gave us J.D. Salinger and Tom Gunn, the poet, and encouraged me a bit for 3 or 4 months while he was there. Then he got stabbed in the playground, and that was kind of my...
there's the basis of your film. I'm sure there's an episode of The Simpsons where a kind of teacher comes and Lisa falls for him. I think I had a teacher who kind of introduced me to Scottish literature because we didn't get any at all. He gave us Cheviot Stag and the Black Oil and Sunset Song and that, and it was the same thing. It was like, oh wow, this is out there. And he gets stabbed in the plane.
And that was it. That was my education in literature. The rest of it's all just been self-directed since then.
It's interesting talking for the last 40 minutes or so. You said, Stuart had this idea of the band, and then there was the actual band, and then, Looper seems to be made of people who didn't really want to be on stage and were doing all they could do to hide behind it again. And I think that's really interesting because they kind of clash between real creativity and wanting to make music and make art and everything, and performance, which seems to be a different thing altogether, more uncomfortable thing. Is that what you kind of experienced?
Yeah, I think so. I think that probably my most comfortable experience of performing was being in Belle and Sebastian, because I was off to the side, and then when we were doing Looper as a band, I found that quite easy, but I didn't get anything out of it, I don't think. And I realised just a few weeks ago talking to Karn, I don't have a single memory of being on stage. And I remember that it's as if I'm in the audience looking at the stage. So I don't really get anything out of it, I don't think, and I think you need to get something out of it to go through all the horrible parts of touring. That needs to be driving you to do it, because you're getting some kind of thing from the audience that doesn't really do anything for me. I think.
And what about yourself? I mean, you have played on stage now.
I was always quite nervous, more just about playing the music and being terrified that I would just do it wrong, which I obviously did do, but because of the whole lo-fi homemade thing, you kind of get away with it. But with the deluxe version of the box set, we have a cassette of a live show that we did in America at the Troubadour. And Stuart we came across, and we hadn't heard it for 16 years old or something, and it actually sounds really great, and I do hit a few bum notes, but it sounds fine. But I got to quite enjoy. I did enjoy doing the shows, but it was always a bit of a palaver, because we did always try to have visuals or make it more than just a bunch of people standing uncomfortably on stage. So doing a show was always a bit of a carry on, wasn't it? But at the same time, that was kind of fun, but I suppose that was my part in it. So trying to think up new ways to do it so that it's not just us standing there looking really scared. It is quite fun. I do enjoy it, and we do keep talking about it, about different ways we could do it now.
Before everyone else quits for the
Yeah.
Well, I think we've taken up far enough of your time, but I just want to say thank you very much for coming in and doing this.
Thanks
for having
us. And it's a fantastic book. You know, if any interest in Belle and Sebastian, or even just being in a band, I think it's quite informative for people who think that's what I'd like to do, is be in a band.
Yeah.
To see the pitfalls, but also the things that can be done if you kind of stick to your own belief about, you know, because there was a clear vision throughout that, you know, this is what we want to be and this is what we don't want to be.
Yeah.
And also I think, and you mentioned it before, is having the songs sometimes even before you've got the band. Maybe that's a better way of doing it than having a band and having no songs.
Yeah.
But thanks, Stuart and Karn, for coming along.
Thanks very much.
And we'll be back soon with someone completely different. Cheers.